Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Finkelstein family, I thank you for your presence, both physically and emotionally here this afternoon, but I ask that you find a seat. I want to begin by acknowledging the many of you who have filled this sanctuary and the circles that flow out beyond this space and join us through the streaming of this service of remembrance, this memorial. We come together this afternoon to remember a woman who was known by many names. Names given her by those who she loved. Names given her by that which she loved. She was darling and honey and sweetie. She was mum and nanny and Ruthie. But most of all, she was loved and loving. And it is that we come together this afternoon to celebrate. In his sorrow, the prophet Job cried out, Adonai natan v'Adonai lekach, Yehi Shem Adonai mevarach. The Eternal has given, the Eternal has taken away. Blessed be all that which is eternal. An ancient people, we are well acquainted with grief and with the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us, yet the centuries have taught us that a good name endures beyond the grave, and that there is strength in faith and family. And so, with the greatest amount of reluctance, we join with the prophet and say, Adonai natan, God, you gave us this incredible woman, and she will not be forgotten. For all that was good and enduring in her life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts as we acknowledge Adonai lekach, Eternal One, you have taken away. And we pray for the strength to turn our broken hearts into an altar of trust before which we can acknowledge your sovereignty and your love and that which is beyond our understanding. And with humility, we acknowledge Yehi Shem Adonai mevarach. Blessed be all that which is eternal. We come here this afternoon to remember Ruth and join our hearts together to give comfort and strength to her family. Mourning is a time filled with so many emotions and memories, both bitter and sweet. We begin our service, therefore, with the recitation of psalms and prayers, linking Ruth's life with the millennial-old tradition of the people of Israel, but also giving us the ability to listen to the voice of others in the hope that it will help us find our own voice. Adonai ma'adam v'teda'ehu, ben enosh v'techashevu. From the 144th Psalm, we are reminded, Eternal, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you are mindful of us? We are like a breath, our days like a passing shadow. We come and go like grass which in the morning shoots up renewed, and in the evening fades and withers. You cause us to revert to dust, saying, Shuvu b'nei Adam, Shuvu. Return, O mortal creatures, return. Would that we were wise, that we understood where we are going. For when we die, we carry nothing away. Our glory does not accompany us. Mark the wholehearted, behold the upright, for they shall have peace. Adonai, you redeem the souls of your servants, and none who trust in you shall be desolate. From the 23rd Psalm, we are reminded, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, benotesha yebetzeni, ameim nuchana yachanaleni, nafshi yeshovev, v'yanchei b'gmleglei tzedek, leman shemo. Eternal is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, and restores my soul. You lead me in right paths for the sake of your name. Even when I walk in the valley of the shadow, the valley of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. I have been anointed. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Eternal forever. A third reading, much more modern than ancient, but from the prayer book of this congregation, the prayer book of the High Holidays, are Machzor. Words penned by Rabbi Elvin Fine, but words which many in our community, including Ruth and Don, have taken to heart and drawn strength from over the years. It's entitled A Sacred Pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination, and life is a journey. From childhood to maturity and youth to age. From innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing. From foolishness to discretion and then perhaps to wisdom. From weakness to strength, or strength to weakness, and often back again. From health to sickness and back we pray to health again. From offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat. Under looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage. A sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination, and life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage to life everlasting. Ruth Finkelstein was Manfred and Margot Mitchell's only child. Born on the 10th of August 1940 in Shanghai. Her family and her were German refugees lucky enough to find their way to Australia in 1942. Growing up not so far away in Gardenvale, she was amongst the earliest students at Mount Scopus College. But most would agree, including her, that she gained her most formative education alongside her parents working the stalls at Queen Victoria Market. She was bright, positive, kind and caring, while being tough to the core at the very same time. She was a loyal and dedicated wife to Don. A loving and caring mum to Darren, to Debbie and her Mookie. She was a doting nanny to Jeremy and Adam, Ashley and Dean, Corey and Tian. She was not the best cook in the world. As family law has it, she had the cleanest oven in Melbourne. But she loved nothing more than providing for her family. For Ruth, family came first, second, and third. And nothing was ever too much for those who she loved and those who loved her. So as we gather here this afternoon to remember her life, rather than lingering longer than necessary on words of tradition, prayers and sacred scriptures, I want to do what Ruth would have wanted to have done, which is to have the rabbi stop talking and listen to her children and her grandchildren. So I'd like to invite Darren to come and offer some words on behalf of his sisters and him.
It's both Mum and Dad's wishes to be cremated, and Mum will rest in peace at the Rose Garden in Springvale, which is why we are all here today and not at the graveside. Thank you so much for everybody attending. She would have loved this. Probably standing there with a roll call or something to see who was here and who wasn't. She loved the fact that we're here not far from Malvern Central, Giardino's, Portofino's and Saigon, which are all around the corner. But she'd always find a way to quickly zip off to the pokies and try her luck one more time. For those of you that don't know me, you've clearly not spoken to Ruth. I'm her eldest son, Darren, and I talk today on behalf of Dad, my sisters Debbie and Karen, our partners Susie, Dino and Ollie, and Nanny Ruth's grandson Ash will talk shortly on behalf of her grandchildren. Everyone loved Nanny Ruth. It was the title, Nanny Ruth, that gave her a real purpose, her role in which she thrived and everyone knew it, and she was proudly owning it till the very last day. With Mum passing, she leaves a significant hole in our family. There was only one Nanny Ruth. If she'd liked you, you knew it straight away. Boy, let's hope she liked you. She proudly launched into talk about her family. She was right in her element. Mum's passing was sudden, and looking around the room today, with everybody here and all the many text messages we've all received, the phone calls, seeing all the meals people have dropped in, she would have loved every bit of this, because today it's all about her. There was a queue of walking frames outside her room at Regis a few days ago from eager residents to see how she's doing and check in on her. Most were there to say their goodbyes because Ruth clearly left a mark. It was only about 6 weeks ago we got the horrible and final diagnosis from her medical team. Even though the doctors tried to slow down the tumour's growth, it became evasive and at warp speed, which is quite fitting really, because Mum needed everything done quick. The word patience certainly wasn't in her dialogue, and I guess that's where I get it from. Even though it felt like a sprint, her passing was so peaceful. No pain, surrounded by her family and never alone, exactly as Mum wanted it. Lockdown last year was really challenging. As Dad turned 50, add a few more on that. As Dad turned 90 and Mum turned 80 during lockdown, they were both stuck inside their apartment. And the time really took a toll on both of them. Being locked up for 4 months was like a prison sentence, with a family connection, the essence of their very existence, and that was taken away. Freedom from lockdown came with Mum's insistence that she could no longer look after Dad anymore and was so concerned for his declining health. So this became a catalyst for their move to Regis Armidale. So for the past 9 months, they were there together. Okay, they had separate bedrooms at either end of the hall, but they were there together and they both looked after each other, and that really transformed their lives. Thanks to Rodney for arranging that for us, because that was just fantastic. And to the wonderful carers, nurses and management of the team at Regis Armidale, she will miss you all dearly. Being at Regis meant for Mum, for the first time in Mum's life, she had others to look after her, and she could finally relax and embrace being cared for rather than being the carer. Mum had a difficult upbringing. When she was young, her father regularly reminded her of his expectations that she never met. He made her feel that the only ambition a young woman in life had was to marry, look after a husband and bear children. He'd say, you should find a rich husband. Mum was the only child born to German immigrants, Margot and Manfred Michelle. And for much of their life, Mum had no real extended family, but over the past few years, welcoming her cousins Gary, Liv, Carol and Harry to their families and well into Dad's life. Manfred's parents had a successful stationery business in Berlin until Kristallnacht, when the business was totally destroyed and burnt to the ground. The decision to leave Germany was quick. Mum was born in Shanghai in 1940. Margot and Manfred, Manfred's cousin, our great auntie Taya, and Manfred's mother, we called Nanny, all fled Germany en route to the promised land here in Australia. Margot and Manfred worked hard to build their lives. They built them from nothing. No possessions, but just a bucket load of chutzpah. First living in Evelyn Street, St Kilda, and then to Rose Street in Garden Vale. Margot and Auntie Taya were sewing tea towels and tablecloths, so Manfred could sell them as a retailer at the market, and soon built a thriving business at the Geelong market where he commuted backwards and forwards every day. How hard that would have been without the convenience of a freeway. Always hands on deck, working long hours, no time to rest and no time for fun. There was just no fun. They all had to work. Margot and Manfred insisted on getting Mum a good Jewish education, largely so Mum could find and marry the right man, which was all important to him and many others during that generation back in those days. Mum was enrolled in the very first and opening class of Mount Scopus College. Scopus was in Brighton Road in St Kilda, not in Burwood as we know it today. Mum did not finish school, nor did she graduate. She leapt into the big world on a journey to find her man. Apparently, Mum was a skinny size 8 with a model figure from the photos, and Dad always said, hubba hubba. So I guess that meant today she was pretty all right. Mum worked as a medical receptionist in Collins Street. That finally made my grandfather somewhat proud of his daughter working in Collins Street. One of Mum's first patients in the practice was this smooth-looking, cigarette-smoking soccer player. He was an older man with a serious knee injury, which he gained from his soccer heroics. The patient was in a bad way, so the delicate young and shapely receptionist leapt up to look after him and attend to his injuries while they waited for the doctor. With no experience, no training, the receptionist tried so hard to please the patient. In doing so, Mum managed to burn his leg so badly that the soccer star told the doctor he'd never visit those rooms again and that he'd tell the rest of his teammates to do the same. Apparently, the patient ended up having surgery and was never the same again. Mum, and of course, the young soccer star, you guessed it right, was Dad. The handsome man from across town in North Carlton. Their paths crossed again at a Jewish dance sometime later, both being engaged to other partners at the time, but that didn't get away of their love story. Mum tried to play sport to surprise Dad, but that didn't work out well either, with Dad saying she was too dainty for that. My grandfather wasn't too thrilled, but Margot, my grandmother, loved Dad to bits, and the feeling was mutual. Sitting in the car one night after Mum and Dad were out, Mum realised she had to act quickly to secure her man. She proposed to Dad in the driveway of their house. In those days, that was pretty courageous of Mum. Go, Nanny Ruth. Mum was 21 and Dad was 31. He wasn't a doctor, accountant or a lawyer, but he was a soccer player, basketballer and cricketer. Dad knew what happiness was like. And that's how they enjoyed every single day of their lives together. Dad always knew how to make a great hand from sometimes shitty cards that were dealt his way. Thank you. So he took Mum on a wonderful ride, and that was the ride of her life. Nothing was going to stop true love. They got married in 1961 in this very synagogue. Do the maths, they celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary together in good health in March of this year, right before Mum's downhill slide. Perhaps my late grandfather would now understand that true love was way more important than all those material things. Our family certainly understands that. We got to choose to break that cycle through a strong and wonderful parenting that Debbie, Karen and I received as Mum and Dad led us by example. Mum and Dad got married in 1961, and 1 year later, in 1962, her favourite and gorgeous son was born. Debbie, also affectionately known as the lump, was born 18 months later. And Karen, 5 years later, was a bonus, a nice way of saying a surprise. And that led to the girls' discussions about IUDs and stuff like that, which really still makes the brother squirm. Now let's go back to the fact that Mum was born in Shanghai. This did our heads in as kids. We were young, and when we were at school, we just didn't put it together that Mum was born in Shanghai, but she didn't look Chinese. And it took us many years to work all that out. So much so that Debbie brought Mum to show and tell. To prove to her school friends that you could be born in Shanghai without having Asian features. While it may not be politically correct these days, in the early 60s and 70s that was totally in keeping with the times, and it often confused the hell out of the three of us for many years. Mum helped Dad set up his clothing agency business. And life was pretty good for the Finkelsteins when we lived in Doncaster as kids. Dad had set up Levi's, Miller shirts, Wrangler jeans, and all those famous brands here in Australia as the manufacturer's agent. and Mum helped with office work, filing, but often that just annoyed the hell out of Dad. In later life, Mum was content to work in retail right away from Dad, where she found the crew at David Jones in the city truly comforting for her. Mum was overjoyed to watch all her family, and we never went without. We had wonderful childhoods, remarkable and fond memories. Mum was the soft parent in the family. Dad was much stricter, so we milked the hell out of that for many years. It even still worked for me until recently. Often we'd go to Mum first because she always protected us. When we got our school report cards, we'd tell Dad the parent-teacher night was only for mums. So Mum would go, she'd come home and tell Dad what wonderful, capable students the three of us were. This was definitely not the case, but gee, she protected us. I once got Mum to write a letter to the principal of the school to say that I could miss the vaccination program because it would hurt too much. And so she wrote the letter without question. Nothing was ever a problem. She'd buy us cigarettes because Dad didn't want us to smoke. You just got to love that. Mum and Dad welcomed everyone into our family with open arms. For 36 years now, Susie's seen it all. And she's been my absolute backbone. And Dad, you know what the saying's like, behind every great man? It's right, isn't it? There's a great woman. When Debbie and Karen repartnered, Mum welcomed Dino and Ollie into our world, as we all did, and she protected them too with an enormous open arms. When my son Jeremy introduced his partner Hugh to the family, he became Huey Baby and was part of Ruth's clan. She was happy, Dad was happy, so long as Jem was happy. Mum was so proud of all her grandchildren, Jeremy, Ash, Dean, Adam, Corey, and her only baby girl, Tian. She was so happy to hear our voices and to do the check-in. It wasn't really deep conversation, it was just to make sure that you're okay. She was satisfied with that. Mum spent much of her life looking after Dad and running around for others with very little care for herself. She followed Dad's sporting pursuits from the soccer field to the cricket pitch to the basketball pitch to the bowling green, and was his number one supporter. Mum sat on Dad's bedside thinking of the many hospital stays, every stent, every pacemaker, every round of radiation and chemotherapy. Mum was determined to get you better and get you home. Back to your family, where he belonged. All Mum wanted for everyone was to be happy. Her devotion to Dad and the care for his well-being was largely her life's mission. Well, your mission was achieved, Mum. Thank you for that, and you'll always be in our hearts. Here's Ash, Debbie's eldest, to talk on behalf of the 6 grandkids.
What a dedicated, loving and passionate grandmother our nanny, Nana Ruth, was. Our fondest memories as grandkids run long. There are so many to list, which makes this incredibly hard to do in a short space of time. These memories we all have are a celebration and a reflection of Nanny's life, the best parts, the parts that will live with us forever. Nanny was loved by everyone, and she loved everyone. She also knew everyone. She always took the time to be friendly with anyone she's crossed paths with. She frequented local small businesses, a handy injection to their livelihoods, which is something our state and country could do with right now, and built strong relationships with most owners of her favourite restaurants. A good example of this is the old Wong's Cafe in Elstonwick, which might now be U2 to some of you. You would think she owned the place, because when she walked in the door, the actual owner shat his pants. Nanny was incredible at always supporting any of our choices. She never doubted us and always wanted the best for us, and should be right behind us from day one. This was emulated across in her unbelievable support for whatever Grandpa did, most notably his distinguished lawn bowls career. And when I say distinguished, I mean distinguished. This was something that she got great pleasure out of seeing him enjoy. As grandkids, we were always comforted by her terms of endearment towards us, which was only for us. Never fear, Nanny's here. It was something she'd always say to any of us, and it always worked. It always helped despite anything we were going through, be it having a bad day at school or losing a game of footy. The comfort we all got from hearing that made any negative situation into a positive and put a smile on all of our faces. This tied into her innate ability to sense when something was wrong, there was something wrong. She always knew, and there was nothing we could say or do to change her mind, even if there wasn't anything wrong. Nanny's sixth sense was truly amazing. The term larger-than-life personality ran very true with her. She had her own unique, and some would say crude, sense of humour, and was never afraid to make it known what she thought, be it for the good or for bad. It's fair to say Nanny was strong-minded, and there were many non-negotiables that painted the picture of her as a person. Any of the grandkids' partners could never be born in April, as there were too many that were in the family already. Anytime there was someone of interest to any of the grandkids, they had to pass the Nanny exam to even stand a chance. Hugh, Perry, Kirsty and Carla passed this exam with flying colours. She was also never late in her life, from dropping her bag off an hour early at bingo to reserve a seat, leaving and returning even before it started, to school pickups. You couldn't fault how prompt she was. Her dedication and love for us as grandkids shone through with school pickups. She embraced the term parallel parking and took it to a new level. Her car was parallel to either trees or bikes on the side of the road, either half on the curb or in a no standing zone, often both. Nothing was stopping her from getting that pole position to pick her grandkids up right outside the front. To add to that, she would arrive no less than an hour early to illegally park in that no standing zone. If you add this to the fact she never eclipsed 30 kilometres per hour while driving, you can imagine what time she actually left to get that spot outside. But that was Nanny. Nothing stopped her from being the first for anyone. There was also not a day or a week that went past when Nanny wouldn't get the grandkids' names mixed up. I was apparently Addie, Dean was Corman, and somehow Tian became Jeremy. Bless her for it, but it never got any better. If you didn't call her within a week, she'd call you and ask you, "Have you lost my number?" She would also call us all on our birthdays at 7 a.m, always the first to call, and expect that we were awake. If we hadn't rung back, usually because we were asleep, she'd follow up 1 hour later, and we were still asleep. On to the memories. As I said earlier, the list of memories to reflect could go on forever. Some further ones that us as grandkids shared include, but certainly not limited to. She would be at every junior sports game or any extracurricular event, screaming, "Go Addie, Deanie, Corman, Calby, Tani or Jem," from afar. She was our biggest supporter. Rain, hail or shine. Jeremy and Adam and Dean often enjoyed their afternoons at Nanny and Grandpa's and would often ring the doorbell from outside to prank Nanny, proceed to running through the garage door, the back garden and back into the living room before she picked up on it. When she knew who was playing in the prank, she saw the lighter side to it. Before that, not so much. She would often dress in her nightie when we stayed over as kids, which was demoralising, and did a merry dance. It scared us, but also made us burst into tears of laughter. She would hold our hands across the road so tight that it cut off our blood circulation. And most notably, as mentioned earlier, Nanny's cooking was a topic of conversation throughout the whole family, often not in her favour. All of us as grandkids often hoped she would take us through the drive-thru at Ormond McDonald's, as opposed to going home directly. We knew if it was the latter, we'd often be up for any of the dishes she put her blood, sweat and tears into, and unfortunately at times that's exactly what it tasted like. When we got taken to Ormond McDonald's, however, it was the highlight of the week, and a huge sigh of relief. And now how ironic that her little Gem, the only granddaughter out of 6 kids, Tian, now works there. The following list of items were often stored in the cupboard for minimum 3 years without being replaced. Teddy biscuits, jelly beans, jelly, noodles, bolognese, which she added tomato sauce to, which was a sceptical decision at best. Nanny and Grandpa had a dog called Snowball for many years. The grandkids loved Snowball, but the few of us here would often politely torment it, which would drive them crazy. She would sing along to words when listening to 3AW in her majestic voice, whilst the heater was on 40 degrees on a 40-degree day. She loved the footy show. She wouldn't miss an episode so she could watch her beloved Sam Newman, and this was coupled with her love for her beloved navy blues. She would always buy extra food for Jem's housemates, ensuring they don't go without, and also a silent recruiter. She handed Jeremy's resume into McDonald's despite him not wanting the job, and he got it. She also then got Jeremy a job at Delish and Giordano's. Nanny's quotes were arguably some of the best parts of our memories for Nanny. One time at a Cinderella concert, one of the characters in the play wore yellow tights. Nanny, in her inability to be discreet, loudly screamed "Panocle," which was her word for package, and not just once but enough times until she was politely asked to leave as other guests were disturbed. Her candid, crude sense of humour included responses such as, "Go jump," "Not in my lifetime," and when we were often there at her house on an afternoon after school and we wouldn't clean up after ourselves, she'd ask, "What did your last maid die of?" When Grandpa told any of his stories, she would often roll her eyes back and say, "He thinks he's Eddie Maguire." To Grandpa, to Mum, to Mook and Daz, you have the loving support of your entire family, and we will always be here for anything you need. This isn't easy, and it will never be, but be assured Nanny is resting peacefully now, looking down on all of us as she smiles with pride. We'll all miss Nanny so much. We love you. Rest in peace.
Well done. When I asked you, Don, how you would describe this woman you loved so much, who loved you so much, who together you created so much with, you lifted up your hands, you shrugged your shoulders, you looked at me and said, "Rabbi, she's just a typical Yiddish mama." And I listened to the stories, yours and your children, and today your grandchildren. And I feel affirmed in my response that I gave you yesterday. She's not a typical Yiddish mama. There are so many things that we attribute with that characteristic which were not part of her being, and she didn't mind that in the slightest. What she was a loving wife, an incredible mum, an extraordinary nanny. What she was is what our tradition describes as an Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor. The book of Proverbs ends with a 22-verse poem known as Eshet Chayil, the woman of valor. The poem is highly structured. Each of the verses follow directly after the one before it in perfect alphabetical order. It is an acrostic. And the poem's structure and form are matched only by the beauty of its prose and the extraordinary woman that it seeks to honor. And so even though I recognize that she wouldn't want the rabbi to talk for too long, I do think that these words from the book of Proverbs are an appropriate way to honor and respect her. Offer them in translation with, I promise, only one word adapted. Eshet Chayil mi yimtza, a woman of valor who can find. She is more precious than fine pearls. No treasure can match her. She saw her work as rewarding. Her candle burned on into the night. She reached out to those in need and extended her hands to the less fortunate. She was clothed in strength and dignity, and she faced the future eagerly. She spoke with wisdom. The law of kindness was on her lips. Her children and her grandchildren rise up and bless her. Her husband praised her. Many daughters of Israel have done valiantly. But she led them all. My friends, I invite you to rise for the memorial prayer. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Chamtzei Menucha Nachat Kamtai Ashchina, Im Kadoshim Utorihim, Kozhar Hakia Mazmirihim, Et Nishmat, Ruth, Chana, Vat Avraham V'Sarah, שהלכה לעולמה, בעל הרחמים, יסתריה בסתיו נקף לעולמים, ויצרו בתרו החיים, את נשמתה, אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר אמן. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to our beloved Ruth, who has entered eternity. God of mercy, let her find refuge in the shadow of your wings. Let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. Eternity is her inheritance. May she rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. In the Talmud, we are taught that escorting our loved ones on their final journey is the most profound of mitzvot available to us. A mitzvah, a righteous act, a deed without the hope of reward. And so we stay standing as one community to fulfill that mitzvah right now. Adonai Natan, Adonai Lekach, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevorach. God has given, God has taken away. Blessed be all that which is eternal. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam, Asher Yatsa Etchem B'Tova V'Himet Etchem B'Din, V'Natoa B'Techechem Chayei Olam. Baruch Ata Adonai Dayan Ha'emet. We praise you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who forms us in the divine image, who nourishes and sustains us in your goodness. You cause us to die according to your wisdom. You know the number of every soul. You implant immortal life within us. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני רב להושיח בחכל חיים בחסד מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים סומך נופים ורופא חולים ומתיר אסורים ומקיים אמונתו לשנה יפה מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומי דומה לך מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה ברוך אתה אדוני נוטע בתוכך חיי עולם. Blessed are you, Adonai, who gives eternal life to the departed. Mourning is the price we pay for having the courage to love others. Even in grief, we know that the wonder of human life is too complex and too magnificent to be memorialized in endless pain. The gifts that Ruth gave us cannot be measured or weighed, or even lost or tarnished by time. Even in this, your family's darkest hour, you know that some of her light, some of her warmth will always be with you, bringing comfort and courage. And in the fullness of time, we pray healing and peace. We'll gather again this evening for a Shiva Minyan and Ma'ariv service at 6:15. I ask those of you who have taken the time to be here to support this family to let others know that their presence would be very much appreciated either in person or online. But for now, I step down off this bimah to join this family in offering the words of Kaddish Yatom, the mourner's Kaddish. Prayer that is not about death or loss, but rather a prayer that is about life, our gratitude and our appreciation for it. We give thanks for your wife, your mother, and your grandmother's life with these words. Blessing